was his father's. I don't remember if he was his full brother or his half brother. Either way, he is his uncle, his family. And Nellie was taken hostage by Diablo, a new vampire that came into the story, trying to dispose of Vladimir Tod, I believe, because he is a abomination to the vampire race, with him being half human. Somehow, himself, Nellie, Otis, Henry was involved as well, all managed to escape, and it pretty much ended on a high note. Vladimir and Henry were safe, and Nellie is safe, and Otis had his last day of teaching, and then he had to disappear for a little bit for some sort of reason. And seemingly everything ended on a good note. So we'll see what the next book has in store for us. Chapter 1, Hunter for Hire. Jasik gripped the photograph in his hand and scanned the face of the boy. Except for his pale complexion and clever eyes, no one would suspect the dean was anything other than human. But Jasik knew differently. This is him, then. He looked up to the man behind the desk, who nodded once. Vladimir Tod. The man's voice was hoarse and raspy. Jasik slipped the photo into his shirt pocket and cleared his throat again, against his vest. I will need provisions, of course. I will provide whatever you need, the man wore, a bitter, pinched expression on his face. Jasik crossed the room and looked out the window to the city streets outside. It was dark, despite the many street lights. People moved like ants on the pavement below, avoiding the small pools of light. There was almost no telling which were human and which were vampires. Jasik wondered briefly if the sun suddenly rose and bathed them all in light, whether they would scurry away and seek their darkness elsewhere. Might I ask how you came to know of my services? The man behind the desk coughed into an handkerchief before answering. When he removed the cloth from his lips, it was stained with glistening red. Let's not play games, Jasik. I've known for many years that your talents can be bought. Will you hunt this boy or not? Jasik glanced back at the man and smirked. My talents are expensive. I assure you, there is no price that I am unwilling to pay. The man behind the desk leaned forward and flipped open his checkbook. After scribbling for a moment, he paused and nodded to Jasik. All you need to do is provide me with the number of zeros. Jasik faced the desk and glimpsed the check. The ink had not yet dried before he said, 3 more, and you've got a deal. Chapter 2, The Hunger. Vlad squeezed his eyes shut tight. He was awake, but he wasn't incredibly happy about it. Weekends, even summer weekends, were meant for sleeping in, especially when those weekends were spent hanging out super late under the full moon because your vampire genes won't let you go to bed before they've had their full of nighttime. Even more so when you only had a matter of days before the joy of summer would be over and the dread of school would begin. A low, buzzing sound drifted over his face, paused, then moved again toward his right car. Right ear. specialty. One big plus of living with Nellie, who was actually no relation to him at all, but his mother's best friend for years and years before his parents had passed on, was that she could bake cinnamon rolls so sweet and delicious that if she had the determination and funding, she could easily give Cinnabon a run for their money. Just stay away from her meatloaf. They raced out the door and down the stairs. By the time they reached the kitchen, they were panting and famished. Henry spotted the plate of crisp bacon on the table and grunted, "Food." Vlad opened the freezer and grabbed a bag of blood. He plucked a coffee mug from the cupboard and nudged Henry out of the way as he headed for the microwave. "Food." Aunt Nellie turned from her spot at the stove and chuckled. "I take it that means you boys are hungry." But neither Vlad nor Henry answered with any sound that could be classified as a yes or a no. Henry was too busy chewing on several slices of bacon at once, and Vlad had his head tilted back as he gulped down some warm O-positive. It slid down his throat easily. It was always better warm, and when his thirst was quenched, he smacked his lips in satisfaction and reached for a cinnamon roll. Blood and frosting, the vampires answered to coffee and donuts. Deb mentioned that an entire freezer of blood is about to expire at the hospital. "With your appetite lately, Vladimir, I'd better sneak out as much of it as I can." Nellie placed more bacon on the platter and sat a plate of eggs in front of Henry. She flashed Vlad a look of disapproval. "You've got blood all over your shirt." Vlad looked down at the 2-time-sized red circles on his shirt and smiled sheepishly. "Sorry, I was really hungry." Nellie's gaze softened. "Just be more careful next time. Contrary to popular belief, laundry doesn't top my list of favorite things to do." Henry swallowed and reached for the pitcher of orange juice. "So did you get your schedule yet?" Vlad nodded and sighed with an air of gloom and doom. "I got Mrs. Bell for English, first period." Henry offered Vlad a sympathetic glance. "Looks like you're not alone. I've got her too, and from what my mom said yesterday, so does Joss." "When's your cousin supposed to get here anyway?" Vlad stuffed most of the gooey cinnamon roll into his mouth and chewed. The truth was, he was kind of nervous about Henry's cousin moving to town. There was always the slight chance that Joss would interfere with his and Henry's time together, or worse, that he and Joss might not get along. Sunday. "Oh, and just so you know, don't count on seeing me much that day. My mom's on some family togetherness kick." Henry rolled his eyes. Vlad followed suit. How annoying. Nellie flashed him an incredulous glance. "Vladimir." Vlad took a sip of blood and raised an eyebrow at Henry. "I mean, how lovely of your parental figure to insist on enjoying quality time together. You should be grateful." Both boys broke into hysterical laughter. Nellie chuckled and shook her head. "All right, smart mouth. I'm getting the mail. Henry, watch Vlad while I'm gone. He's a terrible maker. He's a troublemaker." Vlad's jaw dropped in mock exasperation. Nellie smiled sweetly. "I mean, he's a wonderful boy who brightens my day and makes life worth living." After she slipped out the front door, Vlad eyed the wicked glimmer in Henry's eyes suspiciously. "What?" Henry's grin broadened. "Did you call Meredith yet?" Vlad straightened his shoulders proudly. "Twice, actually." Henry watched him for a moment, the surprise in his eyes quickly giving way to suspicion. "You talked to her?" "Talked to her." Vlad hadn't yet figured out a way to remove the lump that had taken up residence in his throat ever since she leaned in for a kiss after the Freedom Fest dance, and he'd back away, babbling like some kind of deranged lunatic. Talking to her was the least of his problems. First, he needed to figure out how to breathe whenever she was near. Vlad slowly stretched his hand out and picked up was finished, he met Henry's eyes and sighed. Nope, hung up both times. I think she heard me breathing once, though. That's progress, Henry sighed. You know, she has caller ID, right? Vlad's eyes grew wide. There it was again, that lump in his throat. She does. Henry. Henry answered with a tone of indifference. Yeah, but dude, check this out. He grinned wickedly and lowered his voice to a tone of conspiracy. Last night, Greg told me something interesting about the upperclassmen girls. Vlad leaned up against the counter and tried to act like he wasn't completely curious. Interesting. Like how? Henry leaned closer. He says that if you can get invited to one of the senior parties, that some of those girls take pity on the lower classmen and they'll... Aunt Nellie walked into the kitchen. In one hand was a stack of envelopes, in the other was a small brown box. She glanced at their frozen, startled expressions and raised an eyebrow. What are you boys talking about? They answered in one wavering voice. Nothing. Vlad eyed the envelopes hopefully. Anything from Otis? Nellie sighed and shook her head as she flipped through the stack. Honestly, Vladimir, your uncle has written to you at least once a week since the day he left Bathory. Do you really think he'd forget about you now? She pulled a thick parchment envelope from the pile and held it out to him with a smile. Vlad sighed in relief. He'd only just met his uncle last year, after a horrible misunderstanding. Vlad had no idea Otis was his uncle at the time, instead believing him to be a magical substitute teacher out to expose Vlad's secret and quite possibly kill him. It was a simple mistake. Anyone could have made it. Instead, Otis had been protecting him from Diablo, the president of an Elysian Council, who was determined to find Vlad and punish him for the crime of existing. Apparently, vampires aren't really big on the idea of humans and vampires having kids together. Ever since Otis had left town in order to flee from Elysia and away from vampire kind, Vlad and Otis had exchanged many letters. In them, Otis had taught him how to read the vampiric language, otherwise known as Elysian code, and had urged him to practice his telepathy daily. Vlad was grateful for all of these things. Of course, Otis had also recently encouraged Vlad to work on controlling the minds of others. Vlad was intrigued. There was no doubt about that. must both remember that you are the first of your kind, Vladimir, and things will likely be different for you. When vampires are made, there is a natural order to their skill development, but you were born, and as such, we cannot be certain which traits you will inherit from your father's vampire nature, and which you will not due to your mother's human DNA. We must deal with each other, with each of these skills as it presents itself. Follow the enclosed instructions and practice, practice, practice. However, as your former teacher, I must insist that you refrain from using your telepathy as a means to better grades. And yes, I'll know. Trust me. As for the issues you seem to be having with mind control, give me time to compose some helpful tips regarding this skill. Together, we'll find a way to make this possible. Your father was quite adept at doing this. I confess that it surprises me that you may not be, but please know that I am not disappointed in the least. You are always in my thoughts, Vlad. Please take care of yourself. Be mindful of your surroundings. Be mindful of your surroundings, and please continue to study Elysian code. I know the vampire language is challenging to read, but it is important that you memorize the compendium of conscientia, according to the phrase coined by the notable human philosopher George Santayana. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Next week I will be in London. The address where I can be reached is enclosed. I will write as often as I am able to. Please give my warm regards to Nellie. Yours in eternity, Otis. Vlad ran his fingers over Otis's closing. Yours in eternity. It was the same closing his dad had used in every note, every book, every birthday card he'd ever given to Vlad. Vlad felt the looming shadow of grief sweep over him again. The death of a loved one is funny like that. It doesn't matter how much you grieve or how much time has passed. The littlest reminder of the person who died, a scent, an object, a word, can send you back to the moment you lost them. And before you can blink, you're overcome by the aching sadness you worked so hard to leave behind. It was pretty disheartening to learn that dueling to the death last year against Diablo might set Vampire Society on his heels. Despite the fact that Diablo had started the whole mess in the first place, and Vlad had only blown a hole through him with the Lucius to avoid having Diablo rip one through him with his bare hands. But Vlad could deal with that. After all, thanks to Otis, Alicia thought Vlad was a human, not half vampire. Of course, Otis had said that what with Vlad possessing the Lucius, the most dangerous weapon against vampire kind. Alicia was pretty anxious to agree that he was human, to deny the notion that he was even remotely capable of hurting them, giving them little reason to chase after Vlad. It was frustrating to learn that his uncle had absolutely no sensible advice regarding Vlad's current situation with the girl he liked. He thought about asking Nellie for her input, but the last thing he needed was a 2-hour conversation about when Nellie was a teenager. Vlad sighed. It was hopeless. How was he ever going to explain to Meredith that he had no idea why he hadn't kissed her after Freedom Fest dance last year, and that the only reason he hadn't returned her calls over the summer was that she would ask him to explain his inaction, and he couldn't. How was he supposed to explain something to her that even he didn't understand? What did he say? Henry peered over Vlad's shoulder at the parchment. Vlad folded the letter and shoved it back in the envelope, then withdrew the instructions. He says to tell Nellie hi, and that he's enclosed some tips on telepathy. Nellie smiled warmly and blushed, then glanced at her watch and sighed. She shook her head and reached for her purse. On her way out the door, she called behind her, "I'm proceeded to pop the flaps open. His lips spread into a grin, and he looked at Henry. "You want to play Race to Armageddon too?" Henry gasped at the game box in Vlad's hands. "No way." Vlad flipped the game over and looked at the screenshots. They say it's twice the action, 3 times the gore. Exchanging maniacal grins, they bolted for the living room. 2 hours, a bag of Doritos, 7 Pepsis, and 4 bags of blood later. Vlad and Henry sat their controllers down and stretched. Henry's eyes were wide with awed disgust. "That's so gross. I love it." "No doubt. It's so cool that the androids can fly now." Vlad drained his Pepsi and set the empty can on the coffee table. His stomach rumbled. Henry furrowed his brow. "What's with the alien king having 6 heads? That's new. He's gonna be tough to beat this time." They really added a lot of blood. Speaking of which, Vlad retrieved another bag of blood from the refrigerator. As he was walking back into the living room, he let his fangs elongate. His hunger was pulsing beneath them. He bit through the bag and drained it, then let out a burp and wiped the excess from the corners of his mouth. Henry chuckled. "Pig." Vlad snickered. "Excuse me." Henry bit his lip thoughtfully for a moment. His tone became careful and serious. "Do you think you'll ever start feeding on people?" Vlad shook his head. "No way. Not in a million years." He eyed Henry for a moment with his peripheral vision before facing him. "You actually think I'd do that?" "Well, you did bite me when we were 8. Vlad flashed at Henry an incredulous look. "Dude, we were 8. Besides, you told me to." Henry pretended not to hear him. "And just now, before you bit into that bag, your eyes changed that weird iridescent purple, the way they do when you touch a cliff." Henry nodded to the stringent symbol on the cover of the Encyclopedia Vampirica and shrugged. "I'm just saying it's possible. I mean, what if the bags and snack packs aren't enough anymore?" Vlad shook his head and pressed his lips tightly together, tracing the glyph-like tattoo on the inside of his left wrist lightly. There was a long moment of silence before he spoke. "If they were good enough for my dad to live on, they're good enough for me. Besides, the day I start feeding on people is the day I start beating you at video games." Henry laughed and picked up his controller. "So you're saying